Hey everyone, this is Kathie from Homespun Seasonal Living, and today we have Prisca Benson from Our Green Life with us, and we are going to talk about quietly rebellion from the world, consumer world, by managing our money and what we have now and living in the moment. So we don't want to talk about like dreaming big and winning the lottery. We're going to talk about what we have right now and how to manage it. So Prisca, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me, Kathie. I am a nurse by trade, and I realized that even with that, right, I graduated from school and made more money than both my parents combined. Okay, being first generation American feels like woo, riches. But I had no clue how to manage my money until my first kind of wake up call was when I got married. And my husband, like, he could actually do stuff with his paychecks versus me paying all the credit cards constantly. And then, so we started living a kind of a more intentional life where we actually tried to make sure our income had a purpose. Like we had goals with our money and not just living through life in the now. And then also then even a few years later in 2018, which is like 5 years later, I was like, I still don't feel like my net worth kind of looks like a nurse. So then I started listening to a personal finance podcast, and that taught me to be intentional about investing. And that was helped me grow my wealth to well over $250,000 in a few years. So I'm just here to really kind of show people that it's not too complicated to build wealth and money doesn't have to be confusing. We can stick to the simple things in order to build our wealth.
And if someone is listening to this and they are feeling kind of the same way, like I'm not getting anywhere, maybe they have a lot of debt, or maybe they don't have a lot of debt, but they're just really not getting anywhere. What is the kind of the first step for them to kind of figure this out? Like how do I get started? Because I have a feeling that a lot of people are just like, I just don't even know. And when you don't know what you don't know,
Yes.
it's really hard to get started. So what do they need to know in order to get started, I guess, or start?
I would say the first thing you would need to know is actually what you want out of your life. What is it that you want your life to look like? So that way you can plan like how to make that happen. Because if you're just kind of going to and fro and kind of just doing things because people say or you think that's what you're supposed to do, then it's very challenging to actually get what you want out of life. And it's hard to work towards something that you don't actually care that much about. So ideally, the first step I have you take is to imagine, like, what is it that you want out of life? What things do you want less of? What things do you want more of in life? And use that to be kind of your compass as to like your money plans. And then the second step, just to say, is like assessing where you are now. How far are you from those goals? And so those are the first two things I would recommend.
Have you read the book Your Money or Your Life by any chance?
Yes, I love that
Okay,
book.
so that is the book that got me started on living a simple lifestyle. And quite literally, I read it right after I graduated college, which was in 1996. So a long time ago. And that's something that they talk about in that book, right? Like take I don't think they call it an inventory in the book. It's been a while since I've revisited the book, but kind of take an inventory of everything you have, like everything you own and everything you have debt, and like, what is that getting you? Where is it getting you on your thing? And so when people come to you, like, right, like I would love like to own 2,000 acres in the woods somewhere, right? Like ideally. But I also know that that is financially out of my current reach. And I probably don't really want to try and find the money to do that, right? Like, because it is out of my reach where I currently live. I'm not going to find a job that's going to pay me that kind of money, nor do I want to work the amount of hours that it would
Yes.
require. And that's the simple life, right? Like you have to choose. So, but what do you tell people when they're like, I want, and they're really set on the fact that I want whatever, the $1 million home, which probably isn't, depending on where you live too, right? I understand
Yeah.
economics and location play a big role in certain things like real estate, especially. But so how do you help people, like what advice do you give them when they're like, this is my dream, but maybe the dream either has to be really delayed or maybe it isn't attainable? How do you help people figure that out? Is it possible?
Yeah. So, first off, usually people have more than one thing that they're trying to work on financially. So, we actually work on prioritizing what those things are for you, right? So, putting on a list like of what's the most important, like life would be devastating if I couldn't achieve this thing. So, I could live without this, to, man, I could take it or leave it, to, I really don't give a crap about this thing for real, you know? So that is one thing that's helpful because, you know, you can't, one of the things, Paula Pant actually, she goes, you could afford anything, but you can't afford everything, right? We do not have unlimited funds. But so if we need to prioritize what we're doing, then when it comes to like how big the vision is, it's actually putting in like the plan to do those things. So let's say it is like, oh, I want to do this $1 million house to, you know, pick a big lofty goal. Are you willing, like you said, are you willing to do those things? This is how much income you would have to make. This is how much money you would have to put aside to do this. This is how many hours you would have to put in. Is that something you're willing to do? And if you're willing to do it, have at it. I'm not here to tell you what to do or not. I just want to make sure that you have a plan that makes sense for you and that it fits what you want, you know? So, hey, if you need to save this amount of money, does that mean you're going to defer your retirement? Does that mean you're going to forgo vacations for a bit to afford this home? Like, we'll come up with something that works for you, and then it's up to you to decide if that's really what you want to do.
And so what I'm hearing from you, and I love this message, of course, is that priorities are everything.
Yes.
And so, and I believe that is like one of the most important things when you, I guess in any life, but most certainly in a simple life, because you just,
Yes.
like everybody wants to do it all, but nobody can. And so we have to figure out what is most important. And this is especially true with money. Sure, if you want to have 350 pairs of shoes, go at it. But then you have to remember that something else is a sacrifice. And I like what you're saying here, because you're not saying you have to sacrifice. You're not saying that. You're saying you have to choose, because life is a choice, right? So if you want to have the 3 or 4 vacations a year, that's fine. But that is a choice that might impact the other choices that you want. So you really have to get clear on that.
Exactly.
So people come up with their priorities. What's a way that you would suggest they come up with that? Just kind of like a vision board, or write it down, or do you have any real tips for that?
Yeah, so like sometimes they'll get like a worksheet, like just to kind of give them ideas, to spark ideas. And then from there, they can kind of go off with it, like to really do that as like their homework assignment.
Right.
In order to like kind of take the time, because it's not something you want to sit there and like, oh, I tell you, hey, what are your dreams? Okay, I'm gonna sit down for 5 minutes and figure it out, you know? Like, it's not one of those things that you could do in a split second. So ideally, it's something that, you know, I would give them that assignment to do, and then come back next session, and then we could kind of figure out what is the order of operations that they want to put their goals in.
And I'm going to assume that we talk about debt. Like, so if someone has a lot of debt, I'm a very much I realize there is some good debt, but I'm the kind of person that doesn't like to have debt. Mm-hmm. I've gotten to the point, and I'm older, right? So like, I'm not just starting out. I didn't just graduate college. So I've got time behind me. So I have had debt, right? I have had college loans. I did have a mortgage at one point, and I've paid those things off. But is that what you encourage? I was really blessed with a father who didn't like credit card debt. And so I had a very small amount of that when I first got credit cards, but not like a ton, right? And so I never had to really pay that off. But I know that this is something a lot of people struggle with. And if you're really struggling to make ends meet and you have to use credit cards, it's a whole thing. So are you encouraging people to pay that kind of thing off first, or just get a kind of a really good payment plan in line with your other priorities? Or, I mean, how are you helping people figure out debt with priorities of what you want in life?
So it depends on what the client wants. Ideally, first of all, I want them to have the understanding that, you know, if you do, like, debt freedom is like a big, big part of like financial freedom, right? So if you can and want to, you can be very aggressive with it if you so choose. Kind of like live by very minimal means and just attack the debt. However, for most people, this is not ideal. They want to live a little bit, if not even a moderate amount while they're doing that. So we would formulate a plan that fits that. So for example, I have a client, she's looking to pay off debt. However, she's like, the juice bar is very important for her, that she goes once a week. Okay, we build that into your budget. Does that mean that's a little less money going towards your debt? Yeah, but it doesn't make you miserable, right? We don't need you miserable on this journey. Some people's journeys are going to be so long, and we need them to maintain and stay motivated. So if that means it might take an extra month or two for them to pay off the debt just so that they can fit these other things in their life, then that's what's going to work for them. And then for the people who want to live a lot more life now, like, for example, somebody who has like children and they have to like put them in daycare or do this, the amount of money they can put to debt is so much less than someone who has that freedom. So the whole idea too is to help them acknowledge that, hey, I know this is a rough time now. Like, you have this much money to put towards your debt, but hey, when these many years pass by, kids gonna be out of daycare. Then you could really tackle it. So it really helps them to stay engaged, because even though, yes, maybe you can't do what you want to do now in terms of like attacking a debt because you have all these other responsibilities, but you can still take care of the debt and keep in mind that, hey, we have a plan for the future to like really eliminate it.
And I think that's true. You can only go so long with sacrificing. Yes, there are times in our lives where sometimes we have to make sacrifice, but there's a point where it, like, if you're working all the time and you have absolutely no fun in your life, you're going to give up, right? It's just
Yep.
like, it's like exercising or diet, choosing healthy foods, but still wanting that brownie now and then, says the girl with a huge sweet tooth, right? So like, I feel like you've got to have some sort of relaxation in that. Otherwise it gets really overwhelming and it gets heavy, right? And money especially is heavy anyway. If you're really struggling, it's heavy. And so to make it extra heavy is hard. So I love that idea. Like, and I'm also hearing you say that people should see it kind of as a marathon, something that's going to take a long time. And we live in a culture that is very instant gratification. But this is not that, right? Like, money management, paying off debt, getting your priorities straight and achieving those things, they take a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I think that obviously it depends on how aggressive you are with your goals, because the more aggressive you are with your goals, the shorter the time frame. But if a long time horizon is part of your plan, because of how we worked it out, like, this is the only thing that's going to make sense. If you're taking care of ailing parents, all these things can like affect how quick your journey could be. So if that's the case, then acknowledging that, like, yes, that's part of the journey, and we know that there's an end, and that's the most important thing that keeps people motivated. Like, I know what the plan is, and that actually in itself makes money less heavy. Just knowing that there is an end in sight is a relief. Person doesn't need to feel like a failure. Like, we have something in place to help the situation to get you to where you want to go.
You said about ailing parents. So it made me think of, so if we're on this journey, right, we've committed and we know it's going to take, the kids are in daycare, it's costing us a lot of money, but we can start putting more money aside. But something happens, right? Because it happens to all of us. Something unexpected happens. Mm-hmm. A parent gets ill, a spouse gets ill and can't work. And so we have to make a change, right? We have to be willing to pivot and just do things differently. How do you think people should set themselves up for that? Both financially, obviously, because there's that big component, but also kind of like, because I hear you talking a lot about mindset. So whether or not you're directly trying to be a mindset coach, you kind of are. And so how do you help people or help people to like get their minds ready for the unexpected as well as their finances? Like, what are some things they can do for both to like prepare themselves financially and mentally?
So for one thing, even my background in nursing also adds to this. Okay. So seeing when patients wind up in a hospital without the right plans in place really, really revs up the whole be a planner ahead of time thing. So one major thing is communication with the people in your household, communication with the people that, would influence your money plans, whether it is your ailing parents. What are their wishes? What things do they want out of life? Do they have protections in place? Do they have life insurance? Do they have like long-term care insurance? These are all things you want to know before you need them. Then even for yourself or your spouse or, whoever's the caretaker of your children, do they have things set up? Where are their bank accounts? Do they have insurance? Do they have disability insurance? When you're young, people like, oh, nothing's ever going to happen to me.
Right.
Disabilities happen very often.
Right.
So like
I bet
having
you
those
see
things
it, yeah.
in place. Yeah. So, and then too, in terms of the direct financial application is making sure you have an emergency fund. And so depending on what your situation, there might be different emergency funds. So for people who are like first generation like me, we can have like our own household emergency funds, like me and my husband, then having like an emergency fund for our parents, because if something happens, we want to be able to put money aside for there. Then if you have children, you might want to have something separate, or you might include it in your own emergency fund and household. So it's just to say, like, depending on what your situation is, you're going to adapt your plan to that in order to make, we're all gonna get, ups and downs in our journey, but how can we kind of level it out as much as possible? And that's by trying to think ahead. Don't assume things, like even too, especially for women, we're great caretakers, but a lot of times, like when it comes to money, especially, it's like, somebody else got that, like somebody else can take care of that. But you need to be aware, because what if something happens to the person that's currently responsible for the money? Then what? Then you want to try to figure that out when everything seems to be like it's hitting the fan. It's not a great time to learn a skill.
Right. So my husband is 21 years older than I am. And so because of that age difference, I think we have a different kind of perspective on certain communication things. We understand. I mean, it's not guaranteed that he will die before me, right? I mean, like you say, I could, I live in Montana. I could quite literally hit a moose on a road. You know what I mean? Like anything could happen.
Yes.
I always say get hit by a bus, but that's not so common here. But hit by a moose, could happen. So, but because of the age difference, we have always had very frank communications. We've always been really good about our paperwork. We have our wills in place, beneficiaries on all the accounts, like everything is just like, we have living wills. We have all of that like nailed down.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I'm always surprised. I am constantly surprised that other people don't have that. Yep. And I know it's hard to talk about. It's weird. No one wants to think about the person that they love dying or getting sick or whatever. But I just feel like without that, everything is out of your control if something happens. And then we make really bad mistakes with money. Yeah. I mean, because then we have to just hurry up and try to figure it out. And that's never a good space to be in.
Never, especially when you're already dealing with that, whatever the event that caused it to begin with. You already have the pressure of that, and then the pressure of trying to, like I said, learn a new skill or figure out this thing. It's just not ideal at all. And the thing is, the whole idea of having control over your funds and control over your money is to provide peace. Okay? It's to add to your peace. And a lot of people might think of it when you're like, oh, control, like their word sounds so overbearing, but it's not really. It's just to have insight, and like things aren't just happening to you, you're making things happen.
And we live in a world that moves so fast. And so if we don't have those things in place, it can really spiral. And I've seen it especially in women who are of an older generation, especially. But if you, even any relationship where one person is controlling everything, it can get really crazy. And like, even for us, so I pay all the bills, right? I pay them all online. I pay all the bills. But like, my husband is always aware of what bill has come in and what money has gone out. And obviously he can log into the account anytime he wants. It's just, he's not a good typer, whatever. I just do it. And and it's a lot quicker for me. So I'm able to get it done quickly. But I see in a lot of other people, they don't share that information.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happens and they don't even know, like, you don't even know what things might be in your joint accounts or your joint names and what's going out. And so without that knowledge and communication, all right. So I'm just saying, you definitely have those talks. I know it's hard, people. It's hard to think about someone you love getting sick, but it's just the most important conversation. And you have to do it when you're well, because if you try to do it when something has happened,
because then it's really depressing,
right.
Like what? It's like it's to plan ahead is less depressing.
Well, but not only that, but if it gets contentious for some reason, if like, say the will is contentious for whatever reason, other family members make it contentious. Well, he made the will on it while he was, drugged or what, at the hospital and sedated and whatever. So you want to do it, all those things when you're well, so they have no reproach. I'm always amazed at people who die without a will, and then it has to go to probate, and your people that you care about and need help have to wait for that process.
Yeah.
And that can take years. Years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how are you recommending that, or do you have some suggestions for people? Like, they have this goal and they've decided on a budget. They've worked with you, or they've just figured out it on a spreadsheet. Hopefully they've worked with someone if it's really complicated, and they've figured out what they want. how do you suggest beyond just like a savings account, which I know that you're not necessarily an investment counselor, right? I mean, you're not, but how do you suggest that people kind of make their money work for them? Is it possible, I guess?
Of course. And that's how I built my wealth. So there is like the DIY way, and then there's the hiring a professional way. The DIY way is for people who, first of all, want to bother learning, okay, who want control over their finances, and also like who want to do it cheaply, okay? Because it's not to say that you should do everything at minimal cost as possible. Like I don't believe in like necessarily cheap,
Right.
work. However, if you know how to do it, why pay someone to do it?
Right.
And there's a lot you can do investing wise that are automated. So that way you don't have to keep your eyes on it every 5 seconds. You could, you just have a plan that you just put on repeat and you just kind of let it run. And then even if you're DIYing it, at some point when life is changing, you definitely should get a financial advisor. Preferably, you'd get like a fee-only advisor, someone who's not going to profit off your investments, but someone whose whole, or they call them a fiduciary as well, like people whose whole goal is to create the best plan for you as possible. There's a great brand out there called Nectarine. I think the website is hellonectarine.com. They have fee-only advisors, so that way, if you do like have a life change, you get pregnant, we got to now start planning for this kid. Your ailing parent gets sick. We now need to, change our financial plan to factor that in. Someone dies. And all these things, like these big changes, you do want a financial advisor looking to see if the plan that you have implemented still makes sense for you. And then on the flip side, if you want to completely like have your hands off of it, which I don't recommend, because when you give somebody full reign over your money, that's how people's money disappear.
Yeah, yeah.
So I did like if you do, I mean, there's a bunch of brokerages where they do like do these things for you. And even as a middle ground, there are robo advisors now, which is kind of like an in between having a financial advisor and doing it on your own, where you kind of set up your goals and they go to town on it. The difference with having somebody doing those kind of things, though, whether it's a robo advisor or a financial advisor that's always touching stuff, is that every time you do a transaction, it's kind of getting in the weeds a little bit, but anytime you do a transaction that costs money, versus if you kind of DIY it and you kind of keep something on automation, it doesn't have all those transactions. So these are all just kind of things to consider. An advisor is a good idea if something is changing and you're not sure how to move forward. Go see one, get the clarity, and then go home and implement your plan.
I'm obviously a huge fan of DIY, but there are certain things that I don't DIY, and I definitely, I do the Roth IRAs, and I do the things I know how to do well, or that I know are easy, I guess.
Yeah.
That way. But anytime something gets a little more complicated, it's like doing electrical work, right? Like I know how to change a ceiling fan, but anything more complicated than that, I'm gonna hire the electrician because I don't want to die and I don't want to set the house on fire. And so your finances. I think a lot of us get nervous, right, when someone else gets involved in our money. Plus, and obviously, this would be different for anyone versus what stage of life you are. You can, be more risk averse. I'm not. I am very risk averse about my money, right? So, but like other people might be willing to risk more, and I get it. If you can't get the biscuit, if you don't risk it, kind of thing. But yeah, so obviously talk to somebody, figure it out. You can't do everything yourself, and because money is really heavy. Sometimes I feel like, and this is why you are so great, is because you're someone on the outside, and sometimes because money is really heavy, and it can be really difficult for couples. And I'm assuming that's true for every couple in the world, no matter how we have the money. It's just it can be a tough conversation. And so having outside help can really help you figure that out, right? Because obviously, when you get someone to help you, they're going to see from the outside things that you might not see.
And one of the things I find most often than not when I'm going over someone's money is that they're like, oh, I don't have enough. I'm like, look at all this extra money you have. I'm like, it's so rare that people actually don't have enough that I've encountered anyway. And so I actually shared this on social the other day. It's like, it's not, most people do have disposable income, except they just keep disposing of it rather than putting it to purpose. So for me coming in, I'm like, hey, if you did this, you could, first of all, you can make more interest if you put the money in this account. Or, you're spending this much on going out. Is that if you want to put more money in retirement, you might want to scale that back, And it's taking all that into account. Like you have the funds and the angle to which the person comes to this conversation now is more of empowerment rather than I am lacking. It's like I have an abundance and I can choose to put it this way, that way, that way. Instead of like, I just don't have enough. Oh, inflation. Oh, this. Oh, the government. Like none of that matters, honestly.
Right.
At the end of the day, like whatever we're gonna have to deal with, whatever we're gonna have to deal with, what are you going to do about it?
What you just said, and I'm gonna like write this down when we're done because this was so impactful. Most of us have disposable income, but we're not putting purpose to it.
Yep.
That is like eye awakening, even for me who's pretty good with money, I think, right? And I'm at a place, and I'm at a place where I don't have debt, so I know that I have disposable income because my monthly bills are very low. Currently. But we are making sure that because my husband is older and I'm getting older and, we got to have a plan in place for all those kinds of things. But that idea and that's what simple living is, right? We want to live with purpose. And so you can't just let it wash through your fingers, right? Like, and that's what you're saying. And so I feel like a couple of the things that we've said that I just really want to highlight is that a budget is not really supposed to be torture. It's really supposed to be about empowering.
Yes. And I've seen that in my clients and I've seen it for myself. And that's kind of why I even went into money coaching. It's like, why would a nurse be a money coach? I'm like, learning about money is one of the most empowering things I have experienced in life. And then as things happen, like to be able to like do things with a level head instead of freaking out about it, I'm like, it's amazing. I'm like, everybody should have this. But everything is about a choice that we're going to make. Every dollar, you have to decide whether you're going to spend it, you're going to save it, or you're going to invest it. Like, that's it. Those are your options. And so a lot of times people are like, oh, I hate a budget. It feels restrictive. I'm like, the budget's only telling you what you can spend. If you want to blow past your budget, you're spending beyond your means. It's just that simple. And whether or not that means, sometimes that feels very heavy for someone because maybe they live in a high cost of living area. And it's like, what choice do I have? You have choices. You may not like them, but you have choices.
And that is true. And I know even in my own life still, I'm a very adult woman. There's still times when I'm like, I hate my choices. They're choices. I don't like them, but I have to make one, right? We all have to make some choice.
Yes.
And so the idea of a budget as being something where within we can live, right? And so obviously we want the budget to reflect what we have to spend every month, housing, whatever, and then what we want to spend. And I think a lot of people just don't even realize where their money goes. And is that something that you find? Yeah.
That's all the time. And so like that's where usually they come to me and they're like, oh, they might just directly say, I don't know where my money's going. Other times they'll be like, I'm paycheck to paycheck. And I always feel like you're likely not. You probably feel like you're paycheck to paycheck because how you're spending it, but you're likely not actually paycheck to paycheck. We just gotta see like what you're spending on. If you're doing Uber Eats on a regular basis, you cannot convince me that you're paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
That is a luxury, for Pete's sake. Like, I know it's like standard nowadays in America, but this is not a needs thing. Being paycheck to paycheck means your needs are met and that's it. If you can afford any kind of luxuries on top of that, you are not paycheck to paycheck.
Do you have people like track their expenses? Is that and that's something I learned from Your Money or Your Life. And I used to do very religiously. I do not do as much these days. Probably because I feel like I have a better handle on my money. I don't spend much because I'm not because I've been living a simple life for so long. I'm not tempted to buy much. Like it just doesn't. Money just doesn't go through my fingers. But is that something that you suggest that people do? Like just keep track for a while.
Yes, and I want to emphasize for a while. I don't personally believe in tracking every single expenditure. I do want all my clients to get to a point where they have an idea of how much they want to spend and they stay within that. So like actually for one of my clients, her income was 4 times, like her whole month's expenses could be covered by one paycheck. I'm not writing a budget for you. For what? Just make sure you don't spend more than that paycheck a month. That's it. And then the rest, you make sure, like, the budget really is to make sure that you continue to invest, continue to save, continue to do that. You don't need, oh, I could spend this much on my hair and this much on my groceries and this much, like, it's just keep your expenses within those. And that's that, versus other people. Like for me, I have my budget is basically built of like 4 categories. I don't calculate every expenditure. It's just a housing. Like this how much goes into the shared account for the house. This how much goes to short-term things. And those things have their own categories, but like not like how I implement them is in separate categories. So short-term is like savings, car repairs that could be coming up, house maintenance, that kind of thing. Then I have my long-term savings, which is money that goes into investments. And then I have my spending. As long as I spend less than a month than I have set aside for spending, who cares? And then if you ever have extra there, you can always add it to your other goals. Meaning, like, if you spent less than you gave yourself to spend that month, throw it to one of your goals. Speed up that goal.
And so as people are just trying to figure out, like someone who was saying, I live paycheck to paycheck, I don't even know where the money's going. So is it just really helpful? If you have credit card statements, you can obviously just kind of go back a month, and all your credit card statements are online on your account. Yes. So it's not like you have to have paper copies. You can go back and, right? And you can just kind of see, oh, I did spend $300 on pizza or Uber Eats, I guess, or whatever. I don't do those things. So because I would say that I'm frugal, but I'm actually just really kind of cheap. I mean, I definitely order pizza out. I don't want anyone to think that I don't order takeout, but I have never once used Uber Eats. I do live in a small town, 5,000 people, but I could have something delivered. I just choose not to because I don't want to pay the extra fees and whatever. Yeah. So, but is that the best way, like, just to kind of look back at a couple of credit card statements or what? I mean, if someone's only using cash, which I don't think is probably true.
That's not much. Yeah. But I think that when you're first starting off your journey to like create a budget, I think it is important to look at your expenses and more granularly so that you know what categories to create. Versus like if you go download a budget online, it says, oh, like 50, 30, 20. Like your life may not fit that. And then when you're trying to like squish your life into it, it feels so depressing and oppressive because it's unrealistic. 50% living in Montana for your needs is different than 50% living in New York. You shouldn't feel horrible because you didn't meet the 50% if you live in New York when it's not even feasible,
Right.
So having like looking at your past, like I would say like 3 months is a good gauge of like how much you're spending. And like, okay, how much of this is eating out? How much of this is, your groceries? How much of this is housing? All that. Then that gives you an idea of like the percentage of each. And then you could kind of use that to say, okay, what percentages do I actually want these things to be? And then that's how you build your plan. And then as you iterate, right? Because the first budget you create isn't the budget that's going to make you successful. Okay. And also things change in life where you do have to adjust if your income changes. There's a change in the number of people in your household. All these things will make you have to relook at your budget. You have to know to do that, to update your budget to reflect what your current life looks like. But it has to be based on your current life. I would never recommend someone just grabbing a template and like, okay, my needs need to be 50%. And that's that. If I don't do that, then I'm a failure. It's a horrible way to like address your money and feel about your money.
I love that you said this. Like the first one is never the one that you're going to have forever, and I think that's like an important thing to remember. We're working towards these priorities, but things change, and I say this all the time. Like it's the goal today, but 6 months from now, it might not be the goal anymore. Something could change. I may decide that this isn't what I want anymore, right? So it's important for people, and that's so empowering, Prisca. Like because I think people get this idea that like it's the same for everyone, but there's never like one true way to do anything in life, really. I mean, right? Okay, except for canning, right? But I'm sure there's other things besides canning, but they're like, we want to do things in a safe manner always, but and protect our money and protect our families. But remember that it's individual and that it's always going to change and it's always going to be different.
Yeah, and that's what they're saying about personal finance.
Yeah.
Yep. The whole idea that personal finance is personal. So you can be inspired. Like even when I started my journey, I was listening to this podcast, Choose FI, which to me, honestly, changed my life. Completely changed my life. I would not be where I am today if If it wasn't for my husband, yes, but also for that podcast. Completely changed the way I looked at money. Even my role in my money, I was very unintentional. I was putting money in a retirement account just cause, like, no real goal for that money, no amount that I planned on. It's just like, you're supposed to do these things. You just do it. Great place to start. Okay. Just saying, if that's what you're doing now, good that you acknowledge that. However, what are we doing next? If you have a goal in mind, especially if we work together and we talk about what your goals are, we're going to be more intentional about how we do things. But when they were talking about like certain strategies, I'm like, that doesn't work for me. Does that mean that I'm not going to do anything that they said? No, I made it work for me. You know, when I first heard about like maxing out my 403b, which is the nonprofit version of 401k, when I first learned that, I couldn't just run out and just max it out. I had to, my lifestyle had to change. You know, I had to adjust my thinking. So, okay, I'm not doing it this year. Let's see how close I get next year. Until now that I'm able to max it out every year. So also don't take that as failure. Like, you see someone accomplishing something and you're like, oh, I can't do that. Well, how close can I get to it if that's what I want? You know? And then that's how you get it. And you get this momentum. Like, honestly, even this last year, I was sharing that like with my Roth IRA. Like, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to max it out before year end. Normally I max it out by June, but with certain finances that's happening in my life in this past year, I'm like, all my extra funds is going to a different goal. So I was like, ew, when is this going to happen? But then I had like in October, had a third paycheck. And I always tell people, like, don't treat that as special. Like, that has its own separate budget. Okay. Cause it's like extra money. You shouldn't just treat it like any other paycheck. That was able to like get me so close so that the last time I got paid, I only had to put $80 to max it out for the year.
There you go.
And I was like, oh man, I might not be able to do it till January, February, the way it's looking, you know, when I was first looking at it. But there it goes, you know? So you do what you can with where you are, and then look how to make it a little bit better. Look how to make it a little bit better. And then life adjusts with it. And that's one thing I didn't see coming. So like one time I was just like, let's see what it would take. I love math, okay? Let's see what it would take to max out my 403b. And I'm looking, and at the time, I think my retirement accounts, I was doing like 6% just to get the match, right? And then when I looked to do the math, it was like, oh, you need to do like 19, 20%. I was like, whoa, like for me to max it out. Is that doable? I felt like it was not, but I did it anyway, right? Knowing that nothing is permanent. You could always switch it back. I was like, okay, one paycheck, let's see what happens. I didn't die. And guess what? Still doing it today.
Right, there you go.
And in my life kind of changed. I was like, I was automatically spending less because I have less, you know, funds to just burn. And so that was that.
And I think this is true about a lot of things. And I say this, like, I quite literally say this when I'm teaching like a canning class, right? The more you do something, the better you get, the more efficient you become. And I think that's true about everything. I think that's true about everything under the sun. I say this all the time. People who follow me on Facebook, I say it all the time. It doesn't matter if it's canning. It doesn't matter if it's baking bread. It doesn't matter if it's managing your money. It doesn't matter if it's a professional job that you're doing. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. It always sucks in the beginning. No matter what you're doing, the results they never feel good. They never look as good as someone else's. But what Prisca just said was, life adjusts. You just have to give it a little bit of time. I always tell people you can do anything for 2 years. You can probably, you know, you don't have to commit to that long. You can do anything for 6 months.
Yep.
And a lot can change in 6 months. And mostly what will change is your mindset about something.
Oh, yeah. And what you feel about your abilities will change if you make those changes. So like even with lifestyle, right? I'm trying to think. So like one of the vices I had was like buying a bunch of shoes, right? How often can you actually wear all these shoes? And eventually my lifestyle didn't fit that either because like I'm going to work, I'm a nurse, I wear sneakers.
Right.
I'm like, what? Like now I have like less, I'm married. I'm not going out like, you know, like to parties to like talk to boys or whatever. So it's like, I don't even need all these things anymore, you know? So if you allow yourself like to break out of a pattern that's no longer serving you, right? It's not serving that goal that you have, then try it, you know? And there's like ways you can get around it. Atomic Habits is an amazing book. If people want to check that out. One of the big, most profound things I read in that book was, in order to establish a habit, make the habits you're trying to get rid of harder and make the habits that you're trying to build easier. So if you have something that you find like this habit is draining your funds, how can you make it harder to do that thing? Just start there. And even if you're not spending, let's say something costs you $150 a month, whatever the habit is, it's $150 a month. Then you're like, you know what? I'm gonna do it a little bit less. So now I'm only doing $125 a month, then $100 a month. Then like this is progress, and you should be excited at your ability to do this.
Right. That's great. That's James Clear, right? James Clear
Yes.
Atomic? Yeah. Okay, so I just as a complete aside for everyone and for Prisca, I listened to a wonderful podcast where he was interviewed by Barrett Brooks. I think the name of the podcast is Good Works with Barrett Brooks. It was fabulous. It's really long. It's like a 90-minute podcast interview, but it's fabulous. It's so good. And I had liked him before, but I liked him even more after listening to the podcast. Like, he's just a fine human being. So,
yes, I agree.
Yeah, so that's really good. And that's really important, I think, for anything. We need to remember to celebrate our wins, even when they seem small. They're really not. They're huge. Celebrate your wins.
Yeah,
Great.
those
This
things
was really
compound, like there's even in one of the presentations I do about why your budgets don't work. I have a little like a notebook section that shows up that shows like if you do no effort, one with the exponent of like 0 is what you're doing versus if you do 0.01, the exponent is like how big of an impact that eventually makes. Even when you're on your wealth building journey, they're like your first 100K is the hardest. And so like I was so focused on the first 100K, it was like exciting when I hit that, right? And then a few months ago, maybe like it has to be actually earlier this year because now I'm approaching like 370, right? And when my husband was like, oh, you and your $250,000, I'm like, what? I was like, I didn't even realize it happened. Like it's not something I was even paying attention to because now it's like a habit that's building upon itself. And then especially when it comes to like either paying down debt, which is helping you to have more capital so that you could put towards these kind of goals like saving and investing, or just watching your investments grow over time, they start working for you, right? Like the amount of money that I put in is much less than the amount of money of growth that's happening in the account. And that's because your efforts way back then, when you didn't think you were doing anything, they're still paying dividends.
Right. And that's true for everything in life, but it's especially true. You can actually, with money, you can actually see it a lot more clearly sometimes than other things. Right. So that's great. Well, thank you so much. So Prisca, as we kind of try to wrap this up, is there any other like really super big piece of advice you would give anyone that you can in, this very kind of generic setting?
Whatever your goal is, just get started. Don't get discouraged. Like every piece of movement that you make in the right direction is going to make an effect. You can always compound those efforts, but just get started. So one of the things I was just sharing is like how I got started investing. Some woman she was my manager at Walgreens and I was in college and she's like, young lady, you should invest. Open a share builder account. Did I ever know anything about investing? No. I opened the account. Okay. You learn best by doing. So just do the thing.
That is awesome. Well, thank you. And tell us where everybody, I'll put it in the show notes, of course, but tell everybody where they can find you.
Yes, I'm primarily on Instagram at Our Green Life NJ, NJ like New Jersey. I also have my blog, ourgreenlifenj.com. I'm also on LinkedIn under my regular natural name, Prisca Benson. And that's where I live primarily.
And we'll put a special link because you should sign up for her newsletter because it's really fabulous. I am a subscriber and I love it. So great. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me.